Okay, so I think we're going to kick off now. So I'm just going to mute. If you could mute everyone, we're all friends here. So if you just mute yourselves, that'd be awesome. And we'll kick off now. Just welcome to this podcast and Zoom meeting of Here's Tom with the Weather. This is at this new time, which is at 8 p.m. UK and Ireland, 3 p.m. EST, midday noon in Pacific, and 8:30 in the morning in Australia, Sydney and Melbourne, and 10:30 a.m. in New Zealand. You're all very welcome. Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, I guess. So yeah, it's fantastic to see you here. And just to say, I just wanted to reiterate to everyone that this is not an AA meeting, but it is certainly geared towards the 12 steps. And what we're endeavouring to do with this is to really flesh out and get into step 3, step 11 stuff, and really flesh out those subjects about higher powers. And we welcome anyone who's from a Sufi to a Christian to a Muslim to an atheist to an agnostic. It's all about trying to find a higher power and interviewing people who've been down that road and who have certain lengths of sobriety or are able to express their own spirituality. So it's a celebration of spirituality in all its different forms, I guess. And tonight, or today, or this afternoon again, I'm really, really glad to welcome Frank Z, who's our guest speaker. And I'm just going to read you a little bit of a blurb that I've got about Frank. And as you'll see, it is very, very impressive. He's an impressive individual. And I've known Frank now for 6 months. He's another Zoom COVID friendship. But just a little bit about Frank. Frank Liddy. He's an internationally respected authority in the field of Zen. Frank was the driving force behind bringing mindfulness to Northern Ireland. He's regarded as a visionary and the co-founding director of the Belfast Mindfulness Centre. Established in 1988, the centre provides a radical, open and contemplative space where lay, novice, as well as experienced seasoned practitioners can meet, share their experiences and practice. Frank is also the co-founder and chair of the Compassionate City Belfast project, which raises awareness into how compassion-focused Eastern contemplative practices can act as a catalyst for positive social change. Frank's also the former Zen Chaplain to Belfast City Council and is currently the mindfulness consultant in residence at Stormont. So for those who don't know, that's the Parliament in Northern Ireland. So the list really goes on. And as I said, I attend Frank's Zen recovery practice. I think several of us do that in this room, and we've been to see him on a 7:30 on a Sunday. So we'll put the details in chat there for you later. But yeah, just a little bit more about Frank is which is important, I think, in terms of where we're at. And I don't want to break his anonymity, and I'm sure he'll be talking about that himself. But I know that Frank is very well versed in the 12-step program of Alcoholics Anonymous. We'll be talking about that first. So how this is going to work is I'm going to ask Frank a few questions to get the ball rolling, and then I would invite you as the meeting goes on. We'll probably go for an hour, maybe an hour and 20 minutes or so, see how we go. And I'll invite you to raise your hand in the chat there if you've got a question as we roll on. But I'm going to start with a few open-ended questions for Frank. So Frank, welcome. Thanks very much for coming along today, mate.
I'm free.
Thank you, mate. It's wonderful. So I'm going to start off with something a little bit provocative. This is just, let's see how this goes, mate. All right. You've been just given the opportunity to have dinner with one of the world's or history's greatest ever spiritual leaders. And that can be anyone, either current or somebody from history. I'm going to ask you this. Who would it be? Why would you ask him? And what would you have for pudding?
Very good. Well, in AA, we talk about, beyond our wildest dreams. Oh, by the way, for everybody, my name is Frank, and I'm an alcoholic. My sobriety date would be the 23rd of June, 1993. So, I've had dinner with His Holiness the Dalai Lama on a couple of occasions. The most spiritual person I've come across, on the planet. I'm not too sure about people in the past, but definitely in the present, with all what's going on around us in this unprecedented time. The name of Dalai Lama translates into ocean of wisdom. And I could definitely say that being in his company, a frozen Frankie like me would just thaw. Yeah. So being in his company, the first time I was in this company was back in the year 2000. I had a Tibetan teacher called Panchen Otu Rinpoche, who was part of the Holiness of Dalai Lama school, which would be the Galupa school. And then what happened was I was asked to be one of His Holiness's assistants, when he came to Belfast, and which was an honor. And this is a little story, which is a great story. And I hope I don't sort of veer away off. And if I do, please feel free to bring me back.
I will.
But what happened was I thought Panchen Otu Rinpoche, this Tibetan teacher, who was also quite funny, he spent 6 months in Ireland and 6 months in Mongolia, right? So he said to me that I want you, right, to be an assistant for His Holiness when he comes to Belfast, and you need to meet him at the airplane, right? So there was a big cavalcade, it was like a high sort of dignitary sort of meeting. His Holiness stayed up in Hillsborough Castle. So he was really treated, with great respect by all parties. But anyway, so at the airport, Panchen Otu Rinpoche, the Tibetan teacher, he stood in front of me, right? And then I stood behind him. And all the time, like I was like a frozen Frankie, was just sort of standing there. So all the time I was waiting for someone, to come along and say, what are you doing here? I definitely thought I was an imposter. So anyway, His Holiness came off the plane. He comes to Panchen Otu Rinpoche, the Tibetan teacher, and he bows to him, and they touch their forehead. And then he comes to me. So there's me starting to attention, like a frozen Frankie. And this is my meeting with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. He tickled me under the arms, right? and he said, lighten up. That was my introduction to His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And something happened in that moment, where I was able just to, I was able to let go, and I was able to lighten up. The same way as I know that I can put the pedal down and I can sort of like tighten up. So simple, right? But it's almost as if sometimes we get about that switch that can also, help us to lighten up. So anyway, go back to the person who I'd like to dine with. So I had the opportunity to dine with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and the conversation, right, that I wanted to have with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, because of the troubles in Belfast and because of the trauma of the troubles in Belfast, one thing, and alcoholics know about this too, would be like resentment or anger. So I wanted to know if there was like a mantra or a meditation practice that one could use in relation to anger. So I was sitting with His Holiness the Dalai Lama in St. Anne's Cathedral, Belfast, and I said to him, Your Holiness, I says, do you mind if I ask you a question? And he went, oh, yes, sure, right? So I couldn't believe it. So he was sitting across the room, right? And he beckoned me to come across. Now, as I walked that short distance from where I was sitting, I could see the book that I was going to write. I could see the color of the book I was going to write. I knew it was going to be a short book that would be easy for people to read. And I could see on the cover, it was like, His Holiness the Dalai Lama talks to Frank Liddy about anger, right? So eventually I sit down beside His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and I says, Your Holiness, I says, do you mind if I tape this, right? So I had a little tape recorder in my top pocket, and he went, oh, yes, right? So anyway, I put on the tape, and I says, Your Holiness, I says, is there an antidote to anger? And he went, oh, yes, he said, very, very simple, very, very simple, very, very simple, right? So I turned around, in my head, I lit up, and I thought, fantastic, right? And this is being taped. And I says, what would that be, Your Holiness? And he went, oh, simple. And he was laughing, right? At this point, I wanted to grab him by the throat, shake him and turn around and say, tell me what it is, right? And he said, and I says, and what is it? Written from to recite a mantra, or you need to go on a retreat. And he turned around and he said to me, very simple, he says, I says, what is it? And he says, apologize. So suddenly, the book that I had in my head, which is going to be like 108 pages, came down to like an A4 flyer. That was it. That was it. Anyway, so whenever I dined with him, again, I was really, really sort of blown away about how I felt. I don't know if you would call it osmosis, right? But the way, you could be in a room and then someone comes into the room and you light up. Yep. Mm-hmm. Just because of their presence, you light up. Well, being in his presence, I can honestly say talking to you guys tonight, that I was a frozen Frankie. You know, with trauma, they talk about that fight, flight, freeze. So I was a frozen Frankie, yeah. And this frozen Frankie thought that first meeting, when they tickled me under the arms and said, lighten up. Yeah. Now, what do we have for dessert? Mm-hmm. Is that you want to know yet? So for dessert, you know, I told his Holiness the Dalai Lama that he had to try, you know, a great dessert that we have here in Belfast, and that is apple crumble. Yep. So we have our own type of sort of apple crumble with custard. So we had that was the dessert. But I mean, the main dessert for me was like being with him. You know, I've been with him now 3 times, 2 times for 3 days each time, and another time was just for a day. But you know, I definitely was blessed, and after that, I had that sort of feeling of like, I mean, you know, I'm not searching anymore. Do you know what I mean?
Great. And so was that like a melting of from the head to the heart, as we say in AA? You went from having that head to the love in the heart. Was that sort of an important juncture in your sobriety, I guess, from your spiritual?
Right. Fantastic. It was like my heart was blown wide open. Right. You know what I mean? You know, and like, you know, we know ourselves, you know, the more we break our hearts, the bigger they become. Right? So the sort of, for me, the frozen Frankie was more of a frightened Frankie or a terrified Frankie, you know what I mean? Who was sort of hiding. Yep. And I think he was able then just to bring me out of my hiding place.
And Frank, was this, I guess, a Damascus moment, you might call it? Was that part of your sobriety journey to perhaps step 3 onto step 11 and stuff? Was that kind of part of that process? So I'm assuming you were sober at this time when all this stuff happened, and could you just give us a brief outline of where you went from ground zero up to that point? Just a quick one.
And David, there's no way I could have been with him when I was drunk.
Yeah, well, yeah.
I'd be pushing him out of the way and going, "What are you here?" Yeah. So, you know, I have a great sponsor, and he's still my sponsor, and you know, and he brought me through the steps, and we still made up, you know, quite a lot. And my great sponsor, just 1 second here, please. So my great sponsor, you know, when he brought me through the steps, he told me that when it came to step 11, right, that I would need to go and find, you know, a teacher regarding step 11, because, you know, it's a personal thing. Do you know what I mean? So it wasn't as if like, you know, oh, this is what I do and that you should do, right? So it was I mean, and to this day, like, you know, I have great respect for my sponsor, and that's what I did. And I would say like around about, for me, I would say around about, I got sober in 93, I would say around about 1995, you know, I met a great teacher, the abbot of San Francisco Zen Centre, who came to Belfast, and he had heard about me from a teacher in, he was a Theravada teacher in Thailand. I think it was Ajahn Chan. But anyway, so my friend from San Francisco was with a few other people, and they wanted to do a retreat. It was under the guise of Bernie Glassman from New York City, which was the Zen Peacemakers Order, right? So they had funding and they're coming to Belfast. And so this is the true story. So the true story is that I'm sitting in the house I'm sitting in now, and it was a Sunday. And the next thing was, no tell a lie, it was a Thursday. It was a Thursday night. And what happened was, you know, my phone went off, and I answered the phone, and the guy on the end of the phone turned and says, "Are you ready?" And I turned and said, "I'm always ready." And he says, "You ready now?" I says, "Obviously you don't know me." And the next thing is, knock, 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 the door knocked. I went to the door, and there's the abbot of San Francisco Zen Centre, a guy called Paul Haller, right, who hails from Belfast. He's been away like for about 40 years. And he's along with a couple of other guys, a guy called Michael O'Keefe, an actor, who was a Zen guy with Bernie Glassman, another guy called Grover Cunt from New York City, and a lovely lady called Katie, who was from New York City as well. Anyway, he wanted me to arrange for a retreat for them. Yep. And I was able to do that. But something happened, do you know what I mean? You know, and again, you know, David and others in the rooms, you know what I mean? You know, it's like, you know, the connection that, say, you and I have, you know what I mean? was just something about him that I was attracted to. So what happened was I was with him from that sort of Thursday. The retreat was just a weekend retreat, only a couple of days. And then on the Sunday, I brought him and the other guys down to the railway station in the city centre, where he was going down to Dublin to give a lecture at the Trinity University in Dublin. So there they were on the train to Dublin, and I was standing on the platform, and the train took off, right? And when the train took off, I sobbed like a child. I never cried as much as I cried all the way back to my car, through the railway station, not fussed about who would see me, but I was just sobbing, heartbroken. Yep. Anyway, I got in my car, went back home, and then was out that day. And then whenever I returned, there was a voicemail from Paul, and he said, this is Paul Hutter, the abbot, and he said, would I be free to meet up for something to eat? Yep. Again, I thought he was joking me, something to eat in Dublin. What happened was, at the Trinity College, there was a guy from Belfast who Paul got a lift back to Belfast with this guy and his partner. And it turned out the guy and his partner, especially the guy called Martin Devlin, knew me from the past. So it was like, just all those things come together. Mm-hmm. And so I went down to the place where we were going to meet. And sure enough, there was Paul sitting there. He came back, stayed the night here in the house. And then the next day, I brought him to the bus station, and he went off to get the plane back to San Francisco. From that time to this time, he's still my teacher. He's still my teacher, and I'm still his student. Anything that I've wanted, right? He has been more than kind to support me. Also, when it comes to practice, a bit again like having a sponsor within the program, to have a great teacher being like the abbot of San Francisco Zen Centre is mind blowing. I've been over there a few times doing retreats, but every year Paul's been coming here twice a year to do retreats here in Belfast. That's like over the last, whatever it is, 20 odd years. We have a Zen Centre, which I asked, could we set up a Zen Centre? Certainly. And the Zen Centre, has been going now for whatever, 1998, yes. Whatever, 22 years. Yeah. And that's based in the city centre. And then for those who don't know Belfast or Northern Ireland, being orange and green, here I was, right, elected in 2014 as the chaplain, one of the chaplains in the Belfast City Hall. And like that was unheard of, And I remember like one time I was with Nicola Mullen, and I remember one time we had this vigil outside the City Hall, and it was quite a big turnout, large gathering. And I was standing with the bell that I usually sound on the Sunday night. And then the photograph in the telegraph was, it said something like, the day Belfast went still. It was beautiful. And, for me, it's like, these are things, being born in Belfast, being brought up in Belfast, and with the trauma of the Troubles, never in my wildest dreams would I ever see that.
I was going to ask you about that because I'm currently holidaying in Northern Ireland near Belfast, and I've spent quite a lot of time there, and I've had the fortune to meet all you guys and travel around a bit, and it seems apparent to me that the sectarianism is still there, but it's bubbling away under the surface, and we're sort of experiencing a beautiful peace at the moment. And who knows what's going to happen in the future? But it just, I still see the murals on the walls. I still know that the city's largely partitioned down religious lines, and I can kind of sense, and on the surface it's pretty cool, but underneath there's still a lot of division. Where do you start with such a thing that's like hundreds of years, well, thousands of years old, I guess, in terms of that separation, and and how do you unweave how tangled it is? Because there's a massive spaghetti junction between everything. And where do you see your role in that, and what are you doing on the ground to using Zen and using Buddhism? How's that working for you?
Well, around about 2010, I met a beautiful woman called Karen Armstrong. And for anybody listening in, it's good to check out Karen Armstrong and read any of her books. So Karen Armstrong started up this movement which is called Compassionate City Charter. Yep. So then I brought the charter to our city hall, right, in Belfast back in 2010. 2011. And then I had said to the CEO of the city hall about the possibility, of our city, becoming a compassionate city. She loved the idea. So she did. She loved the idea. But she says that I needed to get all the councillors on my side, right? So I attended. So again, we have like orange and green and somewhere in between. We have people who would be for you and people who are against you. And there's actually people in Belfast who will go out of their way, right, to be offended, right? So anyway, they'll bend over backwards to be offended, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But so anyway, I brought it to council. I put the proposal forward. And it was endorsed 100% by all of council.
Wow.
So that was back about, it took us to about 2014 before our city became a compassionate city. So what does that mean? That means for me, right, so I was born a nationalist Republican, in the west of the city. And I was brought up, and most of my friends would have been in the IRA, and they would have found themselves incarcerated in prisons or shot dead, I had a cousin who was shot dead, but there was something about, the violence, right? There was something about the violence that there had to be another way. Do you mean there had to be like a non-violent way? Anyway, for me, I was very, very lucky, as I said before, and someone who I thought never, ever, ever in a month of Sundays would I be in his house and then later become a good friend. Mm-hmm. And that was the leader and the head of the Ulster Volunteer Force, the UVF, right? Now, I can tell you, the first time I went to meet him in his house, I told a friend to phone me in a half an hour just to make sure that I'm okay. Do you know what I mean? If I don't answer the phone, I said, send someone in. It was like, going into the lion's den, you know what I mean? Mm. Well, that was back again about 2014, 2015. And that guy and I meet up quite regular, about once a month. And then we have tea and good conversation. So this year, unfortunately, due to COVID, right, I have a great friend in Stanford University called Professor Jim Doty, who wrote an amazing book, which I'd recommend people to read. And it's called Into the Magic Shop. Really is a classic book. Our friend John the camera actor has read it. It's an amazing book. Mm. So anyway, Professor Doty is a good friend of mine. So I asked Professor Doty if we could have a conference here in Belfast with neuroscientists, right? Mm. So he said certainly. So what we had arranged, it was for 21st of October, what we had arranged was for 400 neuroscientists were going to come to Belfast. It was going to be 2 days in Queen's University, which would have been the academic side. And then it was going to be 2 days, within this city. So we're going to be looking at sort of at compassion in relationship to restorative justice, compassion in relationship to addiction. There was lots of things taking place. Mm. And we had great people on our side too. We have a great band here called Snow Patrol. Yeah. And their lead singer was going to do a piece for us as well. So we're going to end up with a concert. But then we had to shelve that, come March, with COVID. And actually, to be honest, whenever we met up with Queens and they were talking about COVID, they said that we should put it back for at least a year. Isn't that amazing? That they knew, yeah. Yeah. So we did. We put it back then to next April. But how amazing is that? 400 neuroscientists, and it was going to be looking at the theme was the neuroscience of compassion. Mm. And over here we have a saying that's called "keep her lit," right? Keep her lit. So that was sort of the Belfast slang. So it was the neuroscience of compassion, and it was called "keep her lit." And then what I was saying to people was, whenever one candle lights another candle, the flame of the first candle does not lessen. You with me? Mm-hmm. So that was the idea. So, we have this fear, when it's like, oh, I've got to think about me. Oh, I need to think about me. Oh, I need time for me. Do you mean? From being with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, from getting my heart blown wide open and experiencing, what that compassion stroke empathy can be like, it's kindness all the way. It's kindness all the way.
Okay. Frank, that's Amazing, mate. I really appreciate that. I want to sort of move out of that sort of the kind of the earthly sphere a little bit, and I want to go into Zen and Buddhism, and I'm going to go right off the bat here and stick my neck out a little bit and just ask you, what's your concept of God? Because I know that there's several people have different opinions on that in Buddhism, and there's elements of Buddhism who say there is no God. There are elements that swear by it. There's people that say that the Buddha didn't write about anything after enlightenment because he didn't want to sort of create a dogma whereby people would start shooting each other, and whether that was true or not, I don't know. But where do you fit in with that in terms of your practice of the 12 steps, and how did you conceive of that?
Well, a great teacher told me one time, a great Zen teacher told me at one time, that the Buddha was the first addict. Mm-hmm. And that the Buddha's addiction was an attachment to self.
Ah.
You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So then, the Buddha then developed his own sort of, his own steps. There's the Four Noble Truths, right? And then there's the Eightfold Path.
Eightfold Path.
Yep. Yeah. So, the Four Noble Truths looks at the dukkha, the suffering. So let's say that my suffering, came from alcohol, right? So the alcohol, right, was the suffering, right? So you look at the suffering and then you look at the causes of suffering. So the cause of suffering is the alcohol, right? And then what happens is, for me, then the third truth would be, right, that I stop the suffering, right, which is called the cessation of suffering. And then the fourth truth is, then you go and you help other people. You know what I think? Okay. That's where the transformation takes place. And then, of course, whenever you look into the Eightfold Path, so this is something that you have to embody. Do you mean? So it's not like I'll take a bit of that and I'll take a bit of that and I'll take a bit and a wee bit of that there. It's almost as if, at the core of this sort of bicycle wheel, right? The hub is your daily practice. And then the spokes of the bicycle wheel, right? Are also then, they would be the sort of the Eightfold Path, right? And so if I was practicing wrong speech, so there'd be mindfulness of speech, right? So if I was practicing wrong speech, it would be as if one of those spokes was buckled. Yep.
Okay.
Right. So and then I'd be out of sync. You mean? Mm. But that wouldn't be. The good news is, that wouldn't be that I'd be thinking about those around me. You mean? It'd be about what am I doing that has created this little buckle? And then once we return to our practice, right? Then that buckled spoke straightens up again. Mm. So that's a good news. And then of course, in Zen, there's a great saying, and the saying is, if you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. Yep. Okay. Because there's no Buddha outside of you, right? So what we're actually saying is, kill your illusions, kill your delusions. Then when you think you know, that's when you don't know. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Right? And so it's not about thinking, or it's not about having some type of a Rubik's Cube, and then suddenly it's all together and fixed. Do you know what I mean? Mm. So it's like one breath at a time. It's a journey. So what I teach at Belfast here in the program that I teach, it's called Vuja Day. Vuja Day. So you've heard of deja vu.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what I teach at Belfast is a thing called Vuja Day. Vuja Day. You've heard of deja vu.
Yeah.
So deja vu, right? That's since you've been here before, right? So turn it on its head, Vuja Day. We haven't been here before. This is the first time, that we as a group are meeting. And in Zen, that's called beginner's mind. And in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. And in the expert's mind, there are few. Yep. Okay. Yep. So for me, back to your great question about my perception of God, I have to say that I don't know. That's all I can say. Like I'm sitting here in the house, up near the Cave Hill, and, the grass grows without me telling it to grow. Do you mean? Flowers will, you with me? Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And my sponsor said, and I believe my sponsor to be right, he turned around and he says that the closest that I will get to God is the person next to me.
Okay.
Now, he told me that many years ago, and I can tell you now, I believe that to be true. Mm. You mean? Because everybody is teaching us all the time. Mm. They're teaching us hard to be, or they're teaching us hard not to be.
Mm. That's amazing. I just want to go back. I love what you said about being addicted to self, and I've heard that before in many ways. But I love that idea of that. There's, in a sense, that there is a sense of duality, and that we're kind of like a paper fly thing. We're sort of stuck to that. We're mesmerized by that self. Do you mean self? Do you mean the ego, or that traditional sense of the ego? Is that what you mean by that? Is that we're addicted to that? To the distractions, we're addicted to the distractions. Like, is that? I just wanted to clarify that.
Yep. I mean, when it comes to self, for me, I would say, it's like if you said something that would upset me, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
How can you upset me? Do you know what I mean? How can words upset me? But what it can do is it can sort of like, prick. Do you know what I mean? It can sort of like prick or poke, this great self of who I am. You know what I mean? No. Remember, man, it's a story that we're all making up as we go along. Do you mean? So what happens, like, I normally describe myself as my name's Frank and I'm a recovering thinker. Do you mean? Do you mean? You know what I mean? Because, one thought's too much and 1,000's not enough. Yeah. So what happens is, we get addicted to the narrative, so along comes the thought, along comes the story, and then guess what? It ends up in catastrophe. It ends up, we tend to catastrophize things, right? You know what I mean? So for me, I would say when it comes to practice, we discover that, thoughts are thoughts, are not the mind. Clouds are clouds, are not the sky. You go on a plane through the clouds, you got a clear blue sky, right? So with Zen practice, then what happens is you discover that you're not your thoughts. You know what I mean? Almost like an image that I would have would be, behind waterfalls, usually find behind the waterfall, like maybe a cave. So you're standing in this cave, and in this cave, you're dry as a bone, and you're looking at the waterfall as the water falls down. You know what I mean? Right? And you're not being attached to it, right? You're looking at it. With amusement, right? You know what I mean? Yeah. And the same when it comes to our thinking, and then I find people say to me, but my thoughts have increased or whatever, right? But this is not about not having thoughts. I mean, you can't have a mind without thoughts, the same way as you can't have a cup of without tea leaves. Do you know?
Okay.
Just the way it is.
So the ego, the chatter is still there, but you choose not to believe it, and it's always going to be there. The sort of the pure functionary thoughts, the thoughts that make shopping lists, the thoughts that look at maps, the thought that build bridges, that cook dinner. Those thoughts are there, but it's the I guess the stuff that's above the thoughts pay grade you don't listen to. Is that where it is?
And yeah, but I would say again, right? And we now know through neuroscience. We now know that we now know through neuroscience. They talk about the handy model of the brain. They talk about the lower brain, and they talk about the upper brain. They talk about these wee guys here called the amygdala, which is Greek for like almond, right? So what happens is they say that if there's a war between the lower brain and the upper brain, the lower brain would win. What happens is we flip the lid. We flip the lid. Yep. Okay. But with practice, then what happens with practice is that this is called the cortex, the prefrontal cortex, and the executive function. So what happens whenever we practice, right, is the cortex becomes denser, right? Yep. The amygdala begins to shrink. Yep. Because it's the amygdala. The amygdala would be like a wee dog barking at a shadow or whatever, right? Yep. So what happens is that begins to shrink, and we now know through neuroscience, we're talking about 12 hours of practice. If you practice every day for 20 minutes for a month, that guy goes down like that. There's no doubt, right?
You're talking about meditation here, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yep. So then what happens then? What happens is, so then I start to bring my antennae down. You with me? Mm-hmm. So I go from that fight, flight, freeze, or please, right, into what's called rest and digest. Yep. So it's about being in the gut. Yep. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean to say then, everybody that I'm stress-free. If you can imagine two guys in a car, we're driving along the road, someone cuts in front of me, right? Both of us flip the lid, right? Mm-hmm. But this guy here will recover faster. This guy here will continue to perseverate. This could happen, that could happen. I bet you had no insurance. I bet you they were drunk. I bet you it was a stolen car. 2 weeks later, did you hear what happened to us? Yeah. What I mean? This guy here's recovered. Yep. Mm-hmm. So we now know, right? And it's a great saying too. It's like, every day that you practice, right? I practice every day. So every day that you practice is like sewing your parachute. Yep. Because you cannot sew your parachute when you're falling. You with me?
Mm-hmm.
So it's practice, 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 practice. And then you discover that everything is practice. How we talk to each other, right? Is practice. Am I kind? Am I thoughtful? I mean, am I being harsh? Yep.
So, I love the yapping dog analogy. I think that's fantastic. Yeah.
It's a wee Jack Russell. So what I do now is, right, I teach that wee dog to sit, to stay, and most of all to heal.
Brilliant. Love that. Absolutely fantastic is that. Just going to move along now because we've got people here, and I'm sure if you've got a question, I'm going to ask maybe one or two more questions. But if you've got a question for Frank, could you please raise your hand in the participants column there, and we'll get to you, and we'll sort of because we'll see how long. Are you good for another half hour or so, Frank? Is that all right, mate?
Oh yeah, but before we go to questions, would it be possible for me just to read a poem?
Yeah, sure. I've got another question for you though. I want to ask you a question. But,
okay. Yep.
Yeah, but you get your poem. But yeah, so there's already a few hands going up there. That's great. So,
got it here.
But Frank, you go. I think I know what the poem you're going to read, but this is great, mate. Go for it.
Go. Tell me, please.
No, I'm not. You go. I'll probably get it wrong now. Go on.
Okay. Do you want to read? Well, read the poem now, or do you want the question?
You can read it now, mate. You go for it. Lovely.
Okay. The time will come when, with elation, you will greet yourself arriving at your own door in your own mirror, and each will smile at the other's welcome and say, "Sit here and eat." You will love again the stranger who was yourself. Give bread, give back your heart to itself, to the stranger who has loved you all your life, whom you ignored for another, who knows you by heart. Take down the love letters on the bookshelf, the photographs, the desperate notes, peel your own image from the mirror, and sit and feast on your life.
Beautiful. That wasn't what I was expecting, but that's wonderful, mate. So thank you very much. And just to reiterate, before I'm going to ask a couple more questions, you get some hands up in the participants column. And just to say that Frank's Zen recovery details are in the chat now. I highly recommend you go along and see it. There's a beautiful meditation at the beginning of the meeting for about 20 or so minutes, and then it's an all share back, and it's strictly it's a 12-step recovery meeting. It's fantastic. And Frank's all his details will be in chat as well, where his website is and stuff, where you can contact him, because he's certainly making a big difference in Northern Ireland. So I just want you skillfully evaded my question about God. Is there a supernatural intelligence? Is there an intelligence that pervades everything? Is there something that watches over us all and looks at us, or are we part of it? That's the first question. Second of all, are you enlightened? And would you consider yourself enlightened? Because I know that when people say they're enlightened, I've heard that they're not. So that's the killer two questions from me, mate.
Okay, I'm going to ask the second one first.
Okay.
And the answer to that is no. You know, right?
Okay. How do you know?
Because when you have different experiences, you go to your teacher and you tell, like, there's a thing called Satori, within Zen,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then what you do is you talk to your teacher about it, and then they can sort of like verify or authenticate. You with me?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. But then I remember asking my teacher, the abbot, about enlightenment, and he said to me that enlightenment is the ultimate disappointment.
I love that. But it's simple, just on that. I'm just going to drill down a little bit on this, is not awareness of being aware and knowing that you're alive and that this is all being recorded in time and space or whatever the hell it is that not enlightenment? I'm just intrigued to know, because I've heard so many different things of this. You said that you'd stop seeking. And when you said that you'd stop seeking, to me, that sounds like somebody who's enlightened. So maybe you're being a bit coy.
Maybe I am, maybe I'm not. But, I would try and say that probably enlightenment to me is being kind.
Okay.
If you ask His Holiness the Dalai Lama, what's your religion? He'll say that his religion is kindness. You
Yes.
mean?
You said that.
His religion is kindness. So for me, I would say, we can become addicted to enlightenment. Do you mean?
Yes.
I want to be this, so therefore it's almost like this moment, is not precious. You mean? Do you remember I talked earlier on about beginner's mind?
Yes.
Yep. So it's like, this moment has never happened before. Yep. Or like T.S. Eliot would say, you know, at the end of all our searching, we will return to where we began and we will see it, right, as if for the first time. You know what I think?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's about, you know, wake up, you know, and let's wake up.
Mm.
You know, let's wake up because this is it.
Okay.
No plan B. No plan B.
So there's no reincarnation? It's just now. This is it. This is where we're at in the now. Now is now.
Well, even His Holiness said, I asked His Holiness that question, and he turned and says, you know, he doesn't know what's going to come next, you know, his next breath or his next life.
Okay. Okay. So I guess just, again, because I'm mindful we're getting some hands up here. So in your opinion, enlightenment isn't like this great fireworks display and like the end of 2001, you go through this like light tunnel and you have this massive explosion of awareness and stuff. That's not the case. That's a Hollywood kind of, you know, stereotype thing. It's enlightenment is not that. It's love. Is that what you're saying?
And it's also, I mean, like even within Christianity, you know, Christ would have said, what you do to the least of my brothers, you do unto me. You know, because there is no separation. You know, there is no separation. That's the trick. You know, the trick is that, oh, there's a separation, you and me, us and them, black and white. You know, that doesn't exist. You know what I mean? And then for me to see you, right, you know, as with that heart, you know, with a good heart, with a kind heart, you know, that's where it's at. Do you know what I mean? That's where it's. And here we know, you know, because we've gone through the troubles here in Belfast. You know, you get a gun, I'll get a bigger gun, right? Then you get a bigger gun, and I'll get a bigger gun and a faster gun, right? But at the end of the day, it's kindness. It's kindness at the end of the day, you know, because I know that I have experienced kindness from many people, right? You know, it could be, you know, going into a shop and someone lets me go ahead of them in the shop and I go, that's very kind, or open the door for someone, or they open the door for me, that's very kind, or driving on the motorway and someone gives you the lights to go on the motorway and you give them the lights back. Do you mean? You know, so for me, the sort of that, you know, that way of living is that path of kindness, you know. But before we know kindness as the deepest thing inside, right, we also must know the other side, and that is sorrow. And that's the first noble truth. That's the suffering. So what happens is, you know, I don't want to suffer, so I want to party.
Okay. So hate lives in the head, love lives in the heart, basically, and that's where you get trapped in the head. Okay. And and again, you've evaded me again. You mentioned about God, but is there an intelligence? Is there a super intelligence? Are we the dream in some alien's eye? I don't know. What's your opinion? Do you have an opinion? Do you have an inkling? Is there any sort of thought on that?
I have no idea.
Okay.
I have no idea.
Okay.
You know, it's an amazing journey.
Yeah.
You know, and like, you know, this is only part of the journey.
Fantastic. Well, listen, that's great. Now, listen, I'm going to go. We've got quite a few hands up here for you, Frank. So we'll try and keep it. I know we're getting to quarter to the hour now, so we've probably got about another half hour, 40 minutes. So just be mindful. You've got 4 hands up there. So Yorkshire, Joe, how are you, mate? Do you want to ask Frank a question?
Yeah, hi. Thank you, David. Yeah, I'm Joe. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Joe.
Hey, Joe.
Hello, Frank. Thanks so much. Really nice to listen to you. My question is, so I'm quite early in sobriety, but I would say I've been, I'm a spiritual person generally. And in the last couple of years, I've started doing more, firstly, I've had anxiety and depression. So I've started doing more mindfulness, and that's translated this year to doing some yoga and meditation. I do Kundalini yoga and meditation a couple of times a week. I like the breathing and the chanting and everything like that. But as I've started the 12 steps and I'm reading through the big book, you know, there's the concept of God and the concept of prayer and, you know, praying and praying out aloud. So what I'm kind of working on at the moment, but I was just asking your guidance really on this, is do you kind of keep meditation and prayer as 2 separate things? Is that the easiest way? Or what I've been trying to do is, like, when I've been meditating, I've been in my kind of fairly kind of Zen, aware, in touch moment, trying to kind of bring my thoughts for the day into that, you know, regarding my recovery and such. But it's quite difficult to do in some ways. So can you bring your prayers into your meditation, or is it easy to keep them separate, I guess is my question.
Well, you know, we had a nun here in Belfast way back, I think it was probably the 70s or maybe even the late 60s. And that was Mother Teresa of Calcutta, right? Wow. So she was asked by the BBC here in Belfast, when will there be peace in Ireland? And she replied, when people have suffered enough. Now, I didn't want to hear that. That was way back in the 70s, right? Mm-hmm. So I had the great opportunity, you know, in later life then to ask a question to Mother Teresa, because I was looking for the magical prayer, you know, the prayer that was the prayer of all prayers. I mean, you know, the prayer, the direct line prayer, right? And she said that the greatest prayer is a smile. Right. I mean, now I tell you what, try that, you know, but I'm fascinated and I'm curious, right? So whenever you were saying there then, Joe, about that you're spiritual, what does that mean, spiritual?
For me, it's feeling connected with nature and the universe and life around me, feeling kind of the essence of life kind of in the whole of the physical world, basically. You know, from looking at the stars to looking at the sunrise, or you know, looking at a plant or an animal or whatever, or just feeling love and connection, you know, feeling that there's that underlying thing that transcends the physical, you know, the inherent kind of life within everything. And that for me is when I feel in touch, is when I feel like that. And that, for me, I'm probably more pagan in some senses. I've studied a lot of ancient history and stuff, you know, of interest. And the idea of just having this male masculine God that, you know, is in all these religions, I don't subscribe to, because everything is yin and yang, isn't it? You know, you can't have, light means nothing without dark, and all this energy it would just be a scorched earth if there wasn't the Mother Earth and the nurturing kind of feminine part. So I very much at my core believe that.
Thanks, Joe. Cheers, mate. Thanks for that. So let Frank answer now. That's great. Yeah.
Can I answer?
Yes, please go for it.
Well, no, I would say to Joe, you know, to keep doing and to keep traveling on the path that Joe's traveling, you know, and then when it comes to prayer, I mean, you know, if that's what works for Joe, then that's what works for Joe, and you know, and then if he wants to mix his prayer with meditation, you know, but the school of practice that I come from is called Soto Zen, right? So in Soto Zen, you know, all we do is sit. Do you know what I mean? That's it. You know, there's a great cartoon of this, you know, old senior monk, right? You know, and he's sitting. So in Zen, what happens is whenever we meditate, we sit facing a blank wall, usually a white wall, right? So, so what happens in the cartoon? You've got this old monk, right, sitting there, right, and then this novice comes and sits beside him, right? Yep. Yeah. And the old monk turns to the novice and he says to the novice, "It doesn't get any better than this." So I would say to Joe is keep doing what you're doing and trust your gut. Trust your gut.
Okay.
Brilliant. Wonderful question, Joe, mate. Thanks very much. I'm sorry for cutting you off. We just got to keep the time in, mate, but that was awesome, mate. And well done for coming from Yorkshire, God's country. Wonderful, mate. So Kaiser from the States, mate, how are you?
Hey, good. Hey, everybody. I'm Kaiser. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Kaiser.
So, Frank, I'm a little bit familiar with Zazen and Shikantaza and some of those forms. I just had a little bit of trouble. It didn't really come on board beyond just sitting, just for me. But my question is specifically about, I think it's about 6 and 7. And I'm going to try to make it really quick with this question, but it's hard because I was listening to you. And then now my thinking that had a nice question is kind of a little soft. And these are new informations for me, so I'll try my best. It's been brought to my experience or my attention or whatever you call this, whatever. When I turn over a will in life, or like specifically, when I'm going through a traumatic or difficult or very intense situation, a lot of the times what happens is there's a lot of circular thoughts. There's a lot of obsessive thoughts. There's a lot of that stuff that I don't have control over. And I've noticed that asking whatever the hell the higher power is to help turn it over, I don't necessarily feel the relief. I just forget about the obsessive thoughts because it's kind of been taken care of. So that's how I say that it works, because I'm no longer doing it, which is great. One specific thing is sometimes the content of that obsessive thought continues and keeps revisiting. And it's been brought to my attention that that's in my experience. So sometimes it's almost like I have to go into the story of that and listen to that and digest it and hear what it's having. Not that it's particularly true or particularly me, but there's like stuff in the body, man. It's like I might know that there's no me, or have a solid idea about that. And then there's no progression beyond that, because there's, I don't know, like 10% thought and then like 90% is body. What's up with that? And how, what's your response to that? It's not a specific question, but you kind of get the gist.
Yeah, I do get it. Just, well, you know, about 20 years ago now, I was managing a mental health project, and one of my staff committed suicide, and I felt terrible, right? I felt terrible. I thought, I should have done something better or whatever, right? And then at that same time, right? This is 20 years ago, right? Or maybe 15. But anyway, at that same time, I have a friend in Australia, and he invited me over to Australia. So I thought that was a sign, with me. I thought that was a sign that this dark cloud had appeared, right? Do you mean? And then, so I was just going to take flight, you with me? So I was going to head off to Australia. So I rang up so whenever I sat to meditate, to do Zazen, right? My head was like the washing machine, right? Because all sorts of things, I thought, it was going to be hung out to dry. I mean, it was going to be scapegoated and so on and so forth. I mean, and you have to make sure that all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. But so what happened was I rang my teacher, right, Paul, and I told him about my head spinning. And he said, I lived at a place called Portrush by the sea. So he told me to practice kinhin, like walking meditation. So then, every morning I went on the beach, and I just went down with slippers on. I lived beside the beach, and I just was in my bare feet. And I only walked about 6 or 10 feet, step by step by step, and then turned around and then walked back again, and then turned around and then walked back, So I was practicing kinhin. And what happened then, Kaiser, was, for me, that within about, a week or 10 days, I was able to sit again, right? I was able to sit again, and I didn't, obviously, because I'm here, right? I didn't go to Australia. But Kaiser, the great work now that we know through people like Bessel van der Kolk and others, that the body keeps the score, and because the body keeps the score, what they talk about is with stress or trauma, they talk about the memory of the body, and they talk about that sort of frozen muscle. Yep. So for me, and it works for me, Kaiser, is that, with the Zazen to me is that warmth that allows frozen Frankie to thaw. Yep. Mm-hmm. And I can be kind to myself, and I know that stuff could come up out of nowhere, absolutely out of nowhere, or fear could emerge out of nowhere, right? But I don't run away from it. I sit now and I watch it, right? And I do my best to befriend it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So Kaiser, I would say for a good man like yourself who's practiced Zazen, Shikan Tansi, I would say, that get back on your cushion. Do you know what I mean?
Thanks, bud.
Thank you, Kaiser.
Thank you very much, Kaiser. It's great to see you. And let's stay stateside. Let's go to California. Sean B., how are you, mate?
Thank you, David. Thank you, Frank. Wonderful. As I'm sitting on my Buddha seat and I practice Dojin, meditation. And I'm not a Buddhist. I just practice it with some friends that maybe are more into it. But I've been doing it for a little while now. Not very long, but longer than I've done anything. When I get into the spaciousness of the refuge, or when I'm able to enter that refuge within the center of my heart, and to take rest there and expand. My question. This is gonna seem really crazy and really weird. My question is the separation of like ego, self, and the awareness, the expansion of the consciousness. Like I tap into that consciousness, that universal consciousness of all life forms, of existence, of all realms, all realities, all dimensions, all multiverses, whatever our mind can comprehend, beyond the three-dimensional world that we exist in presently here in this moment. And my awareness consciously, knowing this presently in this moment, that there's this higher self of consciousness, and then there's this little tiny ego over here going, well, what about me? What about me? What about me? And the little ego is like, so I mean, and then it becomes like a mind game of, is this body really mine, or is it being, or is this consciousness is like, I mean, is there identity? Is there possession in there? Is this a big old mind fuck? But I love it. It's like the best mind fuck ever. I mean, it just goes on and on of the different layers, and but then also not getting in the delusion, having the understanding of the fierce destroyer of delusion of self, and keeping it real and just staying present at the mindfulness that we talk about, of being present just in this moment right here and right now. And I am just being my absolute true authentic self the best way I know how to right now. Is it coming from that universal consciousness and connection, or is it coming from the little ego? Or that's my question, if you can get something out of that.
Is it the policeman or the thief?
Very good, very good. Is the policeman or the thief? Sean B, I asked my teacher a similar question, and he told me a Zen story, and the Zen story was that the student asked the teacher, what is this, what is that, what is enlightenment, right? And the teacher replied, have you had your breakfast? And the student said yes. The teacher says, go and wash your bowl. You with me? So we're not getting caught up in the head stories. You with me? Is it this, is it that, and whatever, right? The steps, the 12 steps teaches, the deflation of the ego, it brings about that humility. Do you mean? That humility. And then I would say, Sean B, because I remember hearing you one time talk about like no Native American, which I thought was absolutely amazing. Like, like touch the earth, great stuff. So for me then, Sean B, I would turn around and say, that the more that we practice, right, it's called the art of falling awake. The art of falling awake. So Sean B, it's about being awake, being aware, being alert, being alive. And then as you said, Sean B, it's about being authentic. It's about that authenticity. Yeah. So Sean B, to the great question that you asked, all I can answer is, I don't know. I really don't know.
Well, I just had to express it. I mean, I don't think really it's the same answer anywhere, but I've been on this path for a while, and I'm pretty grounded, and I just love it. And so thank you. I'll remember that. Did you wash the bowl forever? So thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Sean B.
Thank you very much. That was wonderful. Cheers, mate. And now, I just wanted Rhonda has got a question she wants me to ask before I go to Anne and finish with Lebowski. And Rhonda asks, I don't know if you want to ask it yourself, but you're more than, but I'll ask it for you. Rhonda, are you still there? Can you wave at the screen, Rhonda?
I'm here.
You want to ask that question yourself?
Okay,
Why don't you ask it? Go on.
We were so short on time. I was just
you go for it.
Okay, so when I'm in meditation, myself and whatever this higher connection that I'm getting are in the same voice in my head. I'm having trouble. How do I know where the separation is between what I want, my ego or self, versus this true answer that I'm supposed to be listening for when I'm meditating? I don't know if that makes any sense, but it all comes in my voice. So I'm having trouble discerning, I guess, the difference.
So what would you like me to say?
I don't know. I think you just kind of answered it. That's why I put all the laughs in there, because I'm like, we don't know. I mean, I think just stay doing what I'm doing. I had told David I was going to put my hand down because you kind of answered my question, but haven't. You know, I'm very intrigued, and I've been going to the Paul H. Meetings that you just suggested, David, and I plan to do more of these because I'm just learning it. I'm just getting there, and it's really hard to wrap my head around, but I'll stay until I figure it out.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rhonda. Thank you, Rhonda.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, just without plugging that, because it's not a different forum, but on Zen Bitch Slap on a Saturday, or on Thursday or a Saturday, he's got more of a satsang thing, which really delves strongly into that thing you're talking about the policeman and the thief are the same thing. And it is like what Sean described it, that mind F thing that he spoke about. But yeah, I would go see Paul on a Tuesday or Thursday, or come to Frank's thing on a Sunday. It's wonderful. I really recommend you come along, because it is.
I will do. Thank you so very much.
Wonderful
David.
to see you, Rhonda. Wonderful to see you. Now
I'll send you that information for those meetings.
Yeah, and let's go to Lebowski. Can you do the? Unless there's any more. Actually, yeah. After Lebowski, and I think Charlie wants to ask one. Lebowski, do you want to go first?
Sure. I don't really have a question. I just wanted to come in real quick because I'm so honored to be here and have Frank here. There was one thing I don't know if it's appropriate that I ask, but since we're recording this, there's a poem that he includes at the end of the meditation we do at the meeting. And I'd love to have that recorded if that was at all possible.
Yes, I will. I've got your email and I'll wing it off to you.
Okay.
Or do you want me to say it now, or?
Yes.
Now.
Yes, I do. That's
Can
what
I just
I was
mute you,
asking.
Lebowski, while we do that, because there's a bit of noise in the background there, mate.
I understand.
Okay, Frank, over to you.
Okay. So, the birds they sang at the break of day. Start again, I heard them say. Don't hold on to yesterday or what is yet to be. Ring the bell that rings. Forget your perfect offering. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in.
Thank you very much. And the bell. Okay. Now, Charlie's in
Goosebumps, my friend. Thank you.
Cheers,
Thank
James.
you, Lebowski. Love you.
Charlie,
Love you.
Charlie,
Love you too.
You want to come in quickly, Charlie, just at the end there?
Yeah, hi, Charlie, an alcoholic. Frank, thank you very much. I wanted to ask you about, I used to think that those 60,000 thoughts that would come repetitively every day, I would say to myself, it's a separate entity from myself. If I don't romance one of those thoughts, I don't have to get into it. And then I read somewhere that your thoughts are you and they are who you are. It's not that your thoughts are a different entity. So when I meditate and I can't stop the chatter or the noise, I used to ignore it and let it go by, not fight it until I got to where I wanted to go. And my question was, is that chatter a different entity, or is it my ego, or I just have to let it go by?
Charlie, I would say let it go by. Yep. I would say let it go by. Again, for me, Charlie, a bit like yourself with the 60,000 or 600,000, thoughts, most of my thoughts, I would say, are a way of sort of expressing my stress. Do you mean? I find if I'm stressful, I'll be thinking more. You know, when I'm less stressed, you know, I don't think as much. Yep. So, you know, like if I wanted to get healthy, right, over here in Belfast, we do a thing called the couch to 5K, right? So what happens is, you know, so let's say I never ran or whatever. So I sign up to this program for 10 weeks and I go and join all these other beautiful people, you know, and I start walking because I can't run. And then the next thing is I find myself, I'm able to run a bit. I'm able to jog a bit, you know, week by week, day by day, you know. And then the next thing is like in 10 weeks, I'm going to be doing 5K. You know, it works, you know what I mean? It works. So the same thing then applies with our practice, you mean? Because that mindful muscle, right? You know, the Buddha and definitely His Holiness the Dalai Lama would say, you know, that the mind is just a muscle, right? But we guys in the West, right? We are addicted to our thinking. Do you know what I mean? We are addicted to our thinking, right? And that's where our thinking will take us. That's where our thinking will take us. So I would say, Charlie, that you know, find a good practice for yourself. You know, a simple practice. Start off a wee bit like that couch to 5K, where you could sit maybe for 5 minutes, build it up to 10, 15, 20, 25 minutes. And then, you know, we could talk again in a month's time, because there's no doubt in my mind, you know, we have the science now. The evidence is there, right? That through your practice, you know, that we guys talking about the amygdala, it shrinks, right? And with the shrinking of the amygdala, then what happens is we all have what's called, you know, it's called the limbic system, right? Which is the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system, right? So what happens is whenever my antennae goes up, yep, you know, adrenaline and cortisol is released from my body, which is okay short term, but long term is detrimental, right? And sometimes we become addicted to the cortisol and the adrenaline because we're always seeking that high or we're seeking that risk. Yep. Now that's one pedal, right? Which is the sympathetic. The parasympathetic releases dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins, which is all the good stuff. You know what I mean? Actually, with adrenaline and the cortisol, what happens is our immune system goes down, right? And with the parasympathetic, our immune system goes up. You got me? So then what I would say, Charlie, is, you know, that we know now through practice that our practice then takes our foot off that pedal, the sympathetic, yep, and then it applies the parasympathetic. And then we find that, you know, that thoughts are thoughts, they're not the mind. You with me? They're not the mind. You know what I mean? You know, and it's even the stories that we tell ourselves, and we have what's called false memories. You know, maybe we can have false memories that, you know, I'll tell you a quick story for everybody. My friend in San Francisco told me that 50 years ago, an airplane would go from New York to San Francisco, right? But the planes were much smaller then. So what happened was the plane had to land midway to refuel, right? So this is a way before September 11th. This is a way before high security. So the plane took off from New York. It was going to San Francisco. It landed midway to refuel. And the pilot says to the passengers, we've landed here to refuel. Please feel free, you know, to get off the plane and to go on the tarmac and to stretch your legs. Yep. Because the planes were small and they were very cramped. So the passengers got off the plane and went onto the tarmac to stretch their legs. And then the pilot is walking through the plane and there's a passenger sitting there and her name is Betty. And Betty's blind, right? And she's also a frequent flyer. And the pilot said to Betty, he says, take my arm, he says, and I will go for a walk and stretch your legs. Betty says to the pilot, no, thank you very much. I'm okay. Thank you. You're too kind. She says, but could you do me a favor? What's that? Said the pilot. Could you take Buddy, my guide dog, for a walk and let Buddy stretch his legs? The pilot said, you know, I'd be honored. So he got the lead. He put the lead on Buddy the dog. So meanwhile, on the tarmac, people are walking about, you know, stretching their legs, you know, beautiful day, right? They look up at the plane and they see the pilot with the pilot's hat on, his dark glasses, and Buddy the dog. And the truth is, Charlie, my teacher told me, he says, half the people wouldn't get back in that plane. You with me? So what happens, Charlie, is, you know, whenever we come to our senses, sight, sound, smell, touch, and taste, then we drop into the gut, right? We now know about the neuroplasticity of the brain, right? So we know that through practices that the neurons, they fire and rewire, they fire and rewire, they fire and rewire, and then new pathways emerge. You with me? Yep. So we were able to join the dots. So whenever we're able to join the dots, we don't make up stories. We only make up stories when we can't join the dots. Do you mean? Nobody knows what this COVID thing is, right? But we all jump into stories that we believe we know what it is, but we don't, because we can't sit with uncertainty. We can't sit with uncertainty. So suddenly I want the great me, right, wants to know or believe that I know. When in actual fact, I discover that reality is kinder than my thinking.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you very much. Cheers, Charlie. Thank you very much. Now, final question, and it's a bit of a trick one. Well, not a trick one, but it's Frank. I want you to imagine that you've won the lottery. Now, I'm not talking about the spiritual lottery. You won the big one. You got all the numbers, you got all the money, and you've decided to move all your worldly possessions onto a big yacht. It's an 80-foot yacht, all 16 propellers. It goes around the world, and you're cruising along one day. There's a big storm, and your boat starts sinking, and there's a desert island in the distance. You realize that you haven't brought enough bags or enough sacks, and you're only allowed to take one book with you and jump overboard in a plastic bag, and you swim to the island where you hope for you're going to be rescued, and you're going to have one book to sit on this island. What's the book and why?
The book is called Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. Yep. Which you can download free of charge, like from the internet. Why? Because 25, 30 years ago, I was told to read it. And because I knew better, I didn't read it, right? Because it's quite a thin book, right? So I thought, no, I need a thicker book. Do you know what I mean? Because I was a thick person. So anyway, anyway, which I found out later on. But anyway, so the thing is, I found that, in the house where I am now, I have got at least 4. I've got a whole room is a library, right, with books. Yep. Yeah. But when it comes to Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, right, everything that's in Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind is all that I need. You with me? I mean, that would be the bones, right? That would be the bones of practice. The other stuff is just, potting, that's all. It's just potting, right? And it took me a long time, to get around to just reading Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. So that would be the book that I would bring to the island.
Do you know who, is there an author? Is there anyone like down
Shunryu Suzuki Roshi. But, there's only one book called Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind.
Okay. All right.
And then what I love about Suzuki is, it was Suzuki who coined that phrase, no beginner's mind. Yep. So it's Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind.
Okay. Thank you very much. Now, so I just wanted to say thank you again. Thanks very much, Frank. This has been fantastic. It's been wonderful. This is going to be available for recording. We're going to put it on the podcast, and we're going to put it on the Facebook page, if that's okay with you. And I just wanted you to, so where people want to get in contact with you and maybe get some one-to-one coaching and stuff, is there an address or an email address they can get in touch with you?
You're my manager. You know how to get me.
Okay. So if you
contact you. But I would love, David, if I could end tonight with another beautiful poem, this time by an Irish poet.
My pleasure. Please do. Thank you very much.
Yeah. But definitely for anybody who wants to contact me, go via you, and then that I'm easy enough to get. Yep.
Absolutely.
So anyway, this poem is by an Irishman called Brendan Keneally, and it goes like this. Begin again to the summoning birds, to the sight of light at the window. Begin to the roar of the morning traffic all along the road. Every beginning is a promise, born in light and dying in dark, determination and exaltation of springtime flowering away to work. Begin to the pageant of queuing girls, the arrogant loneliness of swans in the canal, bridges linking the past and future, old friends passing though with us still. Begin to the loneliness that cannot end, since it perhaps is what makes us begin. Begin to wonder at unknown faces, at crying birds in the sudden rain, at branches stark in the willing sunlight, at seagulls foraging for bread, at couples sharing a sunny secret, alone together while making good. Though we live in a world that dreams of ending, that always seems about to give in, something that will not acknowledge conclusion, insists that we forever begin.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So I'll just unmute everyone. You can all offer your thanks and stuff like that as well. So there you go. Thank you so much. And that's
thank you, David. Thank you, David.
That's here's Tom with the weather for this week. We'll be back next Friday at the same time with another guest. So please come along. And it's goodbye from us. And thank you again, Frank. Cheers for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.